And I call the member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to follow on from the previous speaker in saying that there is an enormous challenge ahead of both just our generation but future generations in making sure we take on the challenge of Islamic extremism, Daesh and all of its different guises. And today we fully acknowledge the ongoing efforts of the government and coalition forces in combating the atrocious and hateful crimes of ISIL and the tragedy that is befalling on so many people across the world. Because there simply is no place for the jihadism, misogyny, temporary forced marriage, polygyny or patriarchal coercion that exists in the 21st century, as well as the acts of horrific violence that are committed by people in positions such as ISIL against vulnerable and innocent people who don't know wrong and should not become victims simply because of who they are or how they live their lives. The atrocities inflicted on minorities, in particular by ISIL, are indefensible. Their actions represent the worst outcome of an extremist interpretation of Islam that is profoundly incompatible with the modern world. A free world does not seek to homogenise belief or conscience, but instead affirms diversity and advocates for the tolerance and mutual respect. And those are the sorts of values that are directly under assault when you look at ISIL and its objectives around trying to dehumanise people unless they conform to a particular worldview and in the most aggressive and violent way possible if it suits their ends. And these sorts of values of tolerance and mutual respect are central to our way of life, which is why there is such a polarity between us and them, and not to seek to dichotomy simply to say us and them and you're with us and you're against us, but simply to highlight that the inconsistency between who we are and what they are seeking to achieve is so great, because they envisage a future without the values that we share and without the values of liberalism and democracy that we hold so dear and which foster and create a society of tolerance and mutual respect for all. Our Defence Force has an important role in assisting and advising, of course, the Iraqi government to help build capacity and take control of their borders and security. And it's equally important and crucial in a contemporary sense that the Iraqi security forces take back Mosul. It forms part of a broader objective to undermine the terrorist organisation's claim for a so-called Islamic caliphate. For Iraq to benefit from enduring stability, it must secure its own borders and be able to resist any resurgent terrorist activity once ISIL is defeated. That is the long-term objective of the 400 Australian Defence Force personnel currently involved at the invitation of the Iraqi government. And we acknowledge today their heroic efforts of those who serve in uniform for our great country, but not just in terms of their contribution today and in seeking to aspire to the values of our country, but also around promoting peace and security in that region and also protecting so many people who would otherwise be victims of the insane political ideology that seeks to use violence as its means of expanding its influence. There are also other security concerns beyond the Middle East, as foreign terrorist fighters start to return home, whether that is in Europe or Southeast Asia or sometimes indeed where there are threats in Australia. And that's where the tragedy of footage last week of Melbourne's landmarks featured in the terror group's hateful propaganda videos. These messages call for lone wolf attacks on the streets of Brunswick, Broadmeadows and the MCG, while showing recordings of violent acts, including beheadings and bomb blasts. A government's first priority is to protect the safety of its residents, both by securing its borders and holding those people who wish to commit crimes, violent crimes against its citizens to account. And that's why the political objective of this government has been so important, not just around border security, but following it through to making sure that it delivers security for people within our country. As such, the Coalition has increased the funding and legislative powers of our law enforcement and security agencies, giving them the resources needed to protect us from hardened terrorists who seek to destroy our way of life. And getting the balance between how we have those security agencies keep us safe and free is always difficult, and that is why I'll never shy back from being engaged in those important conversations as part of getting the framework right to preserve the freedom that we hold so dear so that we do not end up selling ourselves short or the traditions and values that we inherit to give to future generations. Because behind the ideological conflict for Islamic fundamentalism, the stories of human misery are the real tragedy. We fight this conflict for the sake of our children and for those who have suffered so much already, but also who tragically may suffer into the future, and that we must gift upon this world a a nation as well as a world where we seek to promote mutual respect and harmony to the advancement of all.